So what can studies teach us about UFO conspiracy theories? Can large groups maintain secrets? What are the physics of UFOs? And more. This is The Study Show. I'm Alexander Webb. So in a congressional hearing several months ago, a former U.S. intelligence officer named David Grusch claimed that he has seen persuasive evidence that the U.S. government has alien spacecraft. In light of these explosive claims, I thought it would be great for the Study Show to look at what academic studies can teach us about elements of the claimed UFO conspiracy. Now, even if the aliens part is made up, and I'm not saying it is or isn't, the other elements of the story are definitely real and can be studied, and indeed have been studied by academic researchers. These elements include the math of conspiracy theories. For example, when does an organization get too big to keep a secret? What about the physics of theoretical alien spacecraft? Based on sightings and supposed leakers, what are the capabilities of these hypothetical or potentially real alien craft? The psychology of emotional stories. Can we tell when an emotional story is true or false? And what are the odds of life on other planets? This episode of The Study Show reviews academic studies which explore these questions, as well as providing additional suggestive information about the UFO phenomenon, which is probably the most well-known conspiracy theory in existence today. So let's get started with a paper on the feasibility of large organizations maintaining conspiracies. Study number 1. How long can large organizations keep a conspiracy going? So there are many UFO conspiracy theories, but the one told by David Grusch goes essentially like this. He claims that elements of the U.S. government, aligned with a military contractor, have kept a secret program on this topic for over 70 years. Now, this program has supposedly hid the truth of alien craft or visitation from the public. Now, elements of this story that we know are true are the facts that there are interesting videos of unidentified objects, which some believe are actual flying alien craft, and the U.S. military does admit that it has evidence which it has not released to the public. Now, those are the confirmed true elements. But on the conspiracy side, if you take out aliens, you have a much more mundane and still important question, a question that academic researchers have tried to answer. Now, if a large group of people does something secretly, how long will it take before the secret leaks? Now, we've seen this kind of situation before, notably with Watergate, with the Edward Snowden situation, all sorts of conspiracies that eventually fell apart, even though they were real conspiracies. Now, Dr. David Robert Grimes did a study in 2016 that used math to analyze the plausibility of certain conspiracies based on the number of people who would have to be informed of the conspiracy. If you're watching the video version, you can see that this table from the paper shows that Grimes estimates a conspiracy with 2,500 people would collapse in no longer than 5 years, but a conspiracy with only 125 people could last for up to 100 years. As we can see, the more people involved in a conspiracy, the harder it is to hide the truth about the conspiracy. Now, how did Dr. Grimes get these results? The simplified version is that this paper makes some basic assumptions about the odds someone in on a conspiracy will flip or accidentally reveal the conspiracy. It then multiplies the chance that they'll flip by the number of people who know the truth. Multiply that by the number of years. So even if there's a tiny chance anyone spills the truth, if you have 1 million people on the conspiracy, it's going to be revealed pretty fast. Now, it's pretty intuitive, and you can see the results in these tables if you're watching the video version. Grimes also makes some assumptions about how long it would take for real-world 2016-era conspiracies to unravel, based on the number of people who would have to keep the secret. These involve widespread but obviously false claims, such as the idea that the moon landing was a hoax, that climate change is a fraud, that there's a vaccination conspiracy, or that a cancer cure is being suppressed. Now, especially notable for present-day conspiracy theories is the calculation comparing how long it would take for a vaccination conspiracy to be revealed if the drug companies, which are huge, were also in on it. Grimes estimates that it would take 3 years or less for this conspiracy to fall apart. It just shows one of the many reasons that fringe COVID vaccine conspiracy theories don't really make any sense, even if it's true that there are important scientific debates surrounding the efficacy of the vaccine. Now, my first takeaway from this paper regarding UFO conspiracies is that Grimes does show that small conspiracies can persist for a very long time. Regarding David Grusch's claims, I have no idea how many people are alleged to work in this secret program, but Dr. Grimes does support the idea that, in principle, a very small group of people could keep a program secret for a very long time. However, I do think Dr. Grimes is, very negative on the idea that there's a massive conspiracy across multiple governments. In separate interviews, David Grusch, the UFO whistleblower, has claimed that the Vatican and Italian dictator Benito Mussolini was in on it. And he's also claimed that there's a crashed UFO in a foreign country so large that they had to build a building around it. Other UFO conspiracy theorists have speculated that the Chinese or Russian militaries also have their own UFO crash retrieval programs. This seems exceptionally hard to believe given the number of people involved and the number of ways that this secret could leak. Now, when talking about Dr. Grimes' paper, I do need to note that there was a correction to his paper, but not one that changed the fundamental results. If anything, it shows that Dr. Grimes was perhaps too conservative. Conspiracy theories would be revealed even faster than his original paper calculates. Now, ultimately, I do think Dr. Grimes' work supports the idea of a long-running but small conspiracy, especially if it only involves 50 people or so. But obviously, Dr. Grimes' work says nothing specific about a UFO or alien conspiracy. Now, takeaway number 2 is also from Dr. Grimes' paper, and I think it's worth highlighting a section near the very end of the paper which talks about the dynamics of conspiracy theories. I'll just read straight from the end of the paper. Dr. Grimes writes, "In a recent Californian study on parents, it was found that countering anti-vaccination misconceptions related to autism was possible with clear explanation, but that for parents resolutely opposed to vaccination attempts, to use a rational approach only further entrenched them in their ill-founded views. The grim reality is that there appears to be a cohort so ideologically invested in a belief that for whom no reasoning will shift their convictions, impervious to the intrusions of reality. In these cases, it's highly unlikely that a simple mathematical demonstration of the untenability of their belief will change their viewpoint. However, for the less invested, such an intervention might indeed prove useful." And this is a great point. Long story short, evidence is just counterproductive if you truly believe a conspiracy deep in your bones. Indeed, you might just think that, the conspirators are giving you more false information. It just goes to show that even if it turns out that we've never been visited by aliens and David Grusch is mistaken or intentionally lying, there will definitely be a hardcore group of supporters of UFOs who will cling to this topic forever. They'll say any denials or proof that there aren't UFOs simply shows how widespread the conspiracy is. And a paper like Dr. Grimes that uses math to show why large conspiracy theories just mathematically don't make sense, they'll say that's probably more evidence of the conspiracy. Now, regarding David Grusch, the UFO whistleblower, many Grusch defenders note his impeccable military credentials. But before we get to the next academic paper, I think it's useful to take a step back and think about Mr. Grusch's credentials in the context of some basic statistics. Now, let's think about extreme beliefs or outlier beliefs using basic statistics like Dr. Grimes does. There are approximately 330 million people in the United States. Now, this means a belief so out there that is held by only 1% of people will still equate to 3.3 million believers. Now, various studies online show information like 10% of Americans think the Earth is flat. If that's true, that's 33 million people. And to be sure, some people are joking when they give these answers. But again, just mathematically we know any belief held by a small percentage of people will, in a country the size of the United States or across the world, mean millions of people believe things that most people think is crazy. Now, according to Pew Research, 20% of Americans believe God determines what happens to them, quote, all the time, which equates to 89 million people. This is not to make a judgment on that claim specifically, but for those who are less religious, it does show that the idea of a higher power with mystical abilities is not unusual. The idea of God and aliens is certainly different, but the idea that we're being visited or watched by something that we don't understand or can't control is actually very common, and this is something to consider when considering beliefs in aliens. Now, let's go slightly further with our math and assume that a small subset of people who hold outlier views are also very charismatic and believable and share their stories widely. Let's assume 1% of Americans are convinced UFOs have visited them, and 10% of that 1% are charismatic, smart, and, essentially believable people. That is, they are quote-unquote normal, they don't look, quote, crazy. These are people with, standard normal views, except they believe aliens visited them. That alone, that 10% of the 1% of Americans, would be 330,000 people with believable stories. Now, let's go even further. Let's assume 1% of this group comes forward per year with a well-written or well-explained sounding, believable story about aliens. That would mean we could expect 3,300 believable stories per year. That would be 9 believable, well-written, well-explained stories per day. Now, if around 1% of those people are in the military, and about 1% of Americans or less are in the military, I believe, we would then get 33 stories of UFO encounters from military members, and those would sound believable or at least difficult to disprove. That's 3 stories per month approximately. And so while many David Grusch defenders point to his military record, we should expect some members of the military just statistically to believe in UFOs or come up with UFO stories even if they're not real. Again, David Grusch may be telling the truth. This podcast is not taking a side one way or the other. We're just trying to use academic studies to help think about this phenomenon. This brings us to takeaway number 3. Statistics suggest that there are a lot of people with fringe beliefs out there. And for me personally, this is one reason why lots of convincing stories without specific evidence are not that convincing to me. We should just expect, with a population the size of the United States, that some people will have very convincing stories. And we need evidence to further evaluate these claims. Now, some people do have evidence, which will lead us to the next study. The U.S. government indeed acknowledges it has evidence it won't share. This isn't even a conspiracy theory. It's an admitted statement by government entities, the military, etc. Now, they may have very good reasons for not sharing this evidence, which we'll get into. So the most famous UFO, or as they're sometimes called, UAP case, with acknowledged evidence in the public, is probably the now famous 2004 Nimitz Tic Tac incident, in which U.S. fighter pilots supposedly encountered a Tic Tac-shaped craft in the Pacific, which was flying or hovering. There were multiple eyewitness accounts backed up by radar data. Now, these craft supposedly moved and turned at speeds impossible for human-designed airlines. Now, other similar sightings have been reported, including with radar data and videos. And my understanding is that David Fravor is the most public figure who has participated in this event and also did testify to Congress with David Grusch, although he did not affirmatively claim there was a conspiracy as Mr. Grusch did. Now, much of the data around this incident and other incidents which are alleged remains classified. And the U.S. Navy, the U.S. military admits it has more videos, more evidence, but it has refused to release them. And I'll link in the show notes, in the description as well, to these refusals. They're also available on our Substack blog at thestudyshow.com in the article version of this episode. The U.S. government says, quote, "The release of this information will harm national security as it may provide adversaries valuable information regarding Department of Defense/Navy operations, vulnerabilities, and/or capabilities." I'll also link to several videos which have been publicly released. Now, given all this data, given all this evidence, I think takeaway number 4 is pretty simple. The most basic conspiracy, that some information is held by the government which is not being released, is 100% true. It's not even a conspiracy. The real question is, what are the reasons that data is not being released? Is it simply because the U.S. doesn't want China to know that we know about their new fighter jet? Is it because the U.S. wants China or Russia to believe that one of our advanced craft is from another world, or it's just a disinformation campaign? We just don't know. So the most boring conspiracy theory is not even a conspiracy, it's real. The U.S. government admits it has more evidence of the UFO phenomenon. And that's not to say that it shows that these UFOs are aliens. But we know there are further videos, evidence, things that the government knows that we don't know. And there could be good reasons for that, as said in the previous statement. Now, in the 90s, Wired magazine reported about the Manta or Aurora aircraft program, which some claim are secret U.S. government craft that people mistake for UFOs because of their unusual shape and light patterns. The real question is what all this unknown evidence reveals. Assuming all these are actually U.S. or Chinese craft, it makes a lot of sense why they won't release the information. Now, interestingly, it does appear there's other evidence of the Tic Tac craft out there. There are redacted classified presentations received by the Freedom of Information Act, which refer to a Tic Tac craft like those previously seen. They were supposedly spotted by a satellite surveillance system. They also reference, seemingly, a command and control craft. Now, nearly the entire presentation is redacted. How you interpret this evidence highly depends on your point of view regarding UFOs. If you think that this whole thing is a disinformation campaign, the fact that the government is releasing a report which is very redacted and talks about Tic Tac craft, that's very suspicious. If they truly thought that these sightings were aliens and they wanted to cover it up, you might say they wouldn't release the reports at all. Like even getting a sentence about the Tic Tac craft, they'd probably hide that too, right? But on the other hand, if you think that there's this vast UFO conspiracy and the government is just doing everything it can to barely prevent the truth from being revealed, the fact that we have a partial portion of a PowerPoint talking about Tic Tacs and seemingly might be about aliens, that just shows we're at the tip of the iceberg. So it's just useful to think about this evidence that you can really interpret it multiple different ways depending on your points of view. Now, back to another academic study, which I love here. We're looking now at a study on the possible performance of these Tic Tac UFO craft. So what can academic studies say about the performance of Tic Tac craft? Well, Knuth, Powell, and Reali in 2019, I hope I'm pronouncing those names correctly, studied this based on their reported characteristics of these craft. Now, among other things, the study analyzed what their reported performance would be if they're indeed spacecraft. And I'll link to some articles in the show notes, but let's just say it's important to note that these Tic Tac craft are supposedly able to instantly accelerate, instantly turn, potentially fly underwater, shoot up into space at unimaginable speeds. The priors for academics doing this study are, essentially that these craft can just go at unimaginable speeds and they don't seem to be bound by the rules of physics. Many people in the UFO conspiracy world have speculated that if these craft are real, they may be anti-gravity craft. Now, the authors write in their study, quote, "The main point is that not only are the observed accelerations of these UAVs consistent with those required for interstellar travel, but some of these UAVs exhibit capabilities suggesting that they could be spacecraft with impressive interstellar capabilities." Now, what's most interesting about this paper for me is that there's a chart in the paper that shows if these craft can really travel at near instantaneous speeds, almost the speed of light, if that's truly possible, they calculate the elapsed time experienced by an individual inside the craft to another star system. Now, as a primer, if you don't know, Einstein's theory of relativity suggests that the faster you move, the closer you move to the speed of light, the slower time is for you as you experience it. This also happened in the movie Interstellar. So they travel to another star system. It feels like a week or a month has taken place, but back on Earth, a decade might have taken place. Now, this paper has a chart like that, very like the Interstellar movie, and they show that to the nearest star system with the most impressive capabilities, they assume, even though it would take 4.37 light years to get to that star, Proxima Centauri, this paper shows that it would feel like 1.4 days for somebody in the craft. They also have some other stars, Tau Ceti, hope I'm pronouncing that right, about 12 light years away. It would only take a day and a half of elapsed time if the craft is traveling extremely close to the speed of light. Another star system, TRAPPIST-1, 40 light years away, 1.73 days. Now, they also do some calculations assuming these craft travel at slower speeds, still incredibly fast, but slower speeds. And, for example, that star that's 40 light years away, 58 days of elapsed time, instead of 40 years of time if you travel at the speed of light. Now, of course, it's important to note for us on Earth, if this craft can travel 40 light years away, for us on Earth, it will have taken 40 years for the spacecraft to get there. For those on the spacecraft, it will have taken 58 days or even 1.73 days. It just shows how strange and interesting relativistic travel can be. So what's most important about this chart is that it shows if near speed of light travel is possible, the elapsed time for an individual inside the craft is only going to be a day or two to nearby stars, potentially. And if they're indeed piloted by living beings, it's reasonable that someone with a human-length lifespan could travel between Earth and nearby stars without aging much at all. We don't know if any of this is possible, but the theory among some in the UFO community is that some believe that these craft are anti-gravity craft who can warp space-time around them, enabling them to accelerate and move extremely quickly. The next takeaway number 5, is that if these Tic Tac craft are real, if these UFO craft are real, they're just ludicrously advanced, which does suggest that they may not be made by the US or China or Russia. If these if these extreme acceleration speeds are real as reported by some, it does suggest that they may not be from this Earth because it's just so much more advanced than anything we know that we have. Now, let's look at another study, which is super interesting, by Shaw, published in 2020. Now, this study basically shows that people can't tell the difference between true and false emotional memories. So Shaw in Shaw had subjects watch videos of people recalling false or true memories. And Shaw asked them to judge which was real. And people did no better than chance. In this chart, which is on the video version or linked to in the show notes, it just shows that regarding highly emotional stories, people have trouble telling the difference between truth and fiction. And this means that there's likely room for bad actors to make up UFO encounters. And personally, I do think most UFO stories, even if some are true, would be made up. Now, Shaw notes, quote, "This research provides evidence that false memories look real. Participants were no better than chance at identifying rich emotional false memories, and no better than chance at identifying rich false memories of committing crime." Now, Shaw continues further by saying, quote, "The results presented here have direct implications for police and legal contexts. In addition to the risk of misidentifying false memories as true, the results presented here show the risk of misidentifying true memories as false. Participants were no better than chance at correctly classifying true memories." Which is, a sobering statement. Also for criminal justice, for all sorts of things in life. So, takeaway number 6, this next takeaway for me is we're just not good at identifying false stories. But we also often label true stories as false. And the relevance to the UFO debate to me is clear. We're just not good at determining which of these extreme stories are real or fake, absent other evidence. Now, this is crucial when we consider stories like the story I'm about to tell you, which sometimes pop up online. Now, this is a story from a UFO community on Reddit. This story claims to be written by a Northern California CEO who claims that he saw floating metal orbs twice and then had telepathic contact with non-human intelligence or aliens, and has now been diagnosed with brain damage and brain scarring. Now, in the Reddit post, which I linked to in the show notes, he links to an article discussing Stanford professor Gary Nolan's research on the brains of those who claim to have had UFO or non-human intelligence experiences. Now, many of these brains show brain damage. Since this is just a Reddit post, we can't say anything for sure, but assuming this is not a made-up story, I think this is a fascinating case, and it's really heartbreaking either way, because it speaks to either explanation being true. If these were hallucinations, if this was all made up, the brain damage makes sense. If he really had his brain telepathically contacted by UFOs, the brain damage also makes sense. Now, a touching part of this story is a person in the comments in this UFO community who reports having a similar experience. And he warns him not to tell the story to doctors because he'll sound crazy. And I think the implication is that, he could get fired from his job. He could lose his kids. They don't say that directly, but, if you're accused of being insane, all those things could happen. And, whether or not this UFO event really occurred to this person, reading these comments and hearing this story just gave me a huge sense of compassion and pity for this person, because whether it's true or not, it just has to be a horrible feeling to believe that you've been contacted by a force you can't control or understand, and to learn that you have brain damage, which you think probably came from that experience, and then have nobody believe you and hear that you can't tell your doctor the truth, at least the truth as you see it. That's just so difficult. It's so isolating. And so I think, whether or not these UFO stories are true or not, we have to have a lot of compassion for people like David Grusch, because if he is telling the truth, he's really taking a big risk. And, if he believes this, but it's just not true, I have a lot of compassion for him too, because it would be difficult to believe that and have it not be true and feel you're fighting against this huge conspiracy which isn't real, and that would suggest some other issues, and it would just be very difficult either way. And I think this takes us to the next takeaway I have, takeaway number 7 for me, that, the UFO phenomenon, it's real for many people, whether it's real in reality or not. And that just has a lot of implications for mental health or physics, the state of the universe. Whatever the truth is, this story is fascinating and very important. Now, having looked at those studies, having looked at that supposed eyewitness account and the brain damage that person experienced, I think it's worth stepping back to look at the basic contours of current UFO conspiracy theories and, my personal points of skepticism with them. Now, David Grusch and others seem to argue that, a small group of government officials aligned with military contractors have operated this secret program to reverse engineer UFO craft. They claim these craft have fantastic abilities that we don't understand, we don't know how to produce. Now, on the one hand, David Grusch did have access to secret information. He was in the government, he was in the military, he was in intelligence, we know this. That's acknowledged. And many other high-level officials and politicians, including Harry Reid, John Podesta, John Brennan, he was the former head of the CIA. They've issued comments that seem to believe something is happening there, or at least suggest that something strange is going on. But if we go all the way down the rabbit hole of this UFO conspiracy, if we believe the full take of the UFO conspiracy theory, it also leads us to believe several other extremely implausible things. The first is that alien craft routinely crash despite being extremely advanced. It just seems implausible that aliens with this much technology, anti-gravity craft, space travel, it seems tough to believe that they would crash on Earth, especially very often. 2, they supposedly crash in a manner that they can still be flown or repaired, they can be retrieved. And this is despite being well beyond our technological frontier. 3, if they're not crashed, it means that aliens are simply leaving behind spacecraft for us to find. And 4, in the age of high-powered DSLR cameras, in addition to smartphones, nobody really has a good photo of these alien craft yet. Now, in the video and in the show notes, I'll link to, a dark picture. It's from 9/11. It's a piece of the fuselage of Flight 93, which crashed on September 11th. And it just shows this plane is just destroyed. There's wreckage, there's pieces of metal. There's just not much recoverable. And it just seems implausible that aliens are flying these extremely fast spacecraft and then that we can repair or potentially even fly the wreckage of these craft. It seems unbelievable, but it is also possible that perhaps the wreckage of these craft, it is possible that these craft are so much stronger than our planes are. But if that's true, why are they crashing at all? There's a lot of things that just seem to not add up on first glance with this story. But there are other reasons to be skeptical as well. And here's a big one. A lot of the people in Congress who were really behind this hearing, some of the loudest voices in support of it, they already believe conspiracy theories that are definitely false. Congressman Matt Gaetz claims in a video I'll link to in the show notes or available on thestudyshow.com, He claims that he was stonewalled, but eventually saw a video of a craft that defies known US or Chinese or Russian capabilities. Anna Paulina Luna, a Republican also from Florida, seems to believe that there is a UFO conspiracy. Congressman Tim Burchett, a Republican from Tennessee, said, quote, "We couldn't fight them off if we wanted to. That's why I don't think that they're a threat to us, or they would already have been." Now, what's hurting their credibility here is the fact that they all of them seem to believe the demonstrably false claim that the 2020 election was stolen. They seem to believe that there's a deep state controlling the government, and it's always funny to imagine this deep state conspiracy theory, because you have to think that the deep state, which is supposedly so powerful and controls everything, they let Trump win in 2016, but they stopped him in 2020 when Trump was already the president and controls the military and the FBI and the CIA, and he can fire anybody he wants almost. Like, it doesn't really make sense. And, anyway, these fringe UFO beliefs also seem to pop up in a lot of other disreputable places, like way beyond lawmakers. One of the Americans who defected to North Korea a while back, he gave this rambling anti-American speech, and as part of that speech, he's talking about UFOs, among other stuff. It just, the company some of these UFO conspiracy theorists keep is not the most reputable company. And it's important to really nail this down, because one thing people often forget when talking about conspiracy theories, when talking about this conspiracy theory specifically, is that proving UFOs are real is actually very easy. For the UFO debate, it'll be ended instantly if a UFO lands in Times Square or visits the White House or uses their technology to hover over any major city for a few minutes. Or if a scientist or a normal person, finds a craft in their backyard before the government gets to it and posts it to TikTok, they'll get millions of views. If the scientist finds it and does a little research paper on it, they'll probably win the Nobel Prize. And we'll know UFOs are real. But this is the problem with religious or UFO claims. And I'm not saying religious claims are false or UFO claims are false. I'm just saying that if you know a very powerful being, very powerful intelligence, if they don't want to communicate, if they actively try to hide their existence, then we're in trouble. An extremely powerful being with high technology or mystical power will not be able to be seen easily if they don't want to be. And indeed, God can hide his existence from us if he wants to. UFOs can hide their existence from us. I mean, they could just not even come to Earth. But if they've got faster than light travel, if they've got very fast near speed of light travel, they probably have got cloaking devices. They can do all sorts of things. And so it just really raises questions further for people who are, really believe these are real, is why don't we have more evidence? You have to believe that aliens are here, but they want to hide the secret from us. And if they don't want to hide the secret from us, the government is intent on hiding the secret from us, even though that would probably involve lots and lots of government employees keeping a secret, which Dr. Grimes' mathematics show is very unlikely to be sustainable over a long period. Now, it's interesting also to take a step back and think about the parallels to some religious arguments here. And there is a famous religious debate over the divinity of Jesus known as Lewis's trilemma. Lewis' trilemma basically argues that Jesus was either 1, evil because he knew he was lying, or 2, he was crazy because he was lying but he didn't know it, or 3, he was God because he was telling the truth of his divinity. Now, similarly, I think we can look at the UFO debate 3 ways, or it can be simplified in 3 ways. The first is it could be a psyop. The government or grifters selling books are pushing false information. In short, somebody is lying about it. 2, it could also be a mass delusion. The phenomenon is fake, or it results from crazy people telling stories, or it results from weather patterns or secret craft. But ultimately, there are no UFOs here, but people genuinely believe that there are UFOs. So the phenomenon in this case would be fake, but the belief is real. And 3, it just could be true. UFOs are here, they're real, they have miraculous capabilities. We are like ants. We can't even understand UFOs. They don't want to talk to us because we're not even worth talking to. That's possible. I think this is unlikely, but if the UFOs are real, I think this is probably what's going on here. Now, academic paper number 4 is not really an academic paper, but it's so close and so interesting, I think we should talk about it. It's the Drake equation, which is famous. But if you don't know it, I think it's worth talking about. The Drake equation is one way of roughly estimating the odds of life in the Milky Way. But the output of the equation, the results it gives you, are highly dependent on your priors. Since we have little understanding about how easy it is for life to originate in the first place, it's even unclear what guesses we should make. And for what it's worth, my try at the Drake equation yielded a total of 4 civilizations in the Milky Way. And I'll link to it in the show notes. You can try your hand at it. It's very interesting. Drake himself claimed that the initial meeting with many scientists surrounding this equation resulted in an estimate of between 1,000 to 100 million planets with life on it in the Milky Way alone. This shows just how uncertain we are on this one. And since my inputs, my estimates resulted in an estimate of 4 planets, 4 civilizations, maybe I'm a pessimist here. Now there's 2 more important pieces of evidence I think we should talk about. And if you haven't been following the UFO story the past several years, it might be shocking to know just how bold the claims some people have made, and just how these claims have been published in major publications. For example, Dr. Eric Davis, who's famous in the UFO community, you could do a whole podcast on him alone. This 2020 New York Times article says about him, quote, Davis, who now works for Aerospace Corp, a defense contractor, said he gave a classified briefing to a Defense Department agency as recently as March about retrievals from, quote, off-world vehicles not made on this earth. If you just think about the enormity that the New York Times, which is supposed to be the paper of record in the United States, one of the supposedly most reputable papers in the world, which I'm proud to have written for a couple times as a freelancer, that's huge that they would even publish that. I know the articles I wrote for the New York Times about much less important topics got fact-checked. I mean, you had to justify your sources. So that the fact that this got in the New York Times article, I've been through this, that's huge. It's also worth looking at the comments section of a different 2020 New York Times article called "Do We Believe in UFOs?" That's the wrong question. Now, in that article, the reporters who have been breaking these UFO stories in the New York Times for years, Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, and hats off to them for their work on this topic. Whatever the truth is, they've done great work exposing this issue for whatever it is. I definitely respect both of them and the Times for publishing it. I mean, the comments on that article where Ralph Blumenthal, a veteran reporter, he responds to comments by average people asking him questions about their research for the articles. And in one of these comments, Ralph Blumenthal says the evidence that he and Leslie Kean have seen suggests that they are indeed off-world vehicles. This is a New York Times reporter writing in the comment section of the New York Times in an article about their reporting process for UFO articles, responding responding and suggesting that he seems to believe some of these off-world vehicle claims. Now that's huge. That's earth-shattering. That doesn't mean it's true, but the very fact that the New York Times is willing to put its reputation on the line for something which many people think is so fringe, so out there, so controversial, that's huge. I'll link to this comment section because there are some amazing comments which are very well worth thinking about. So takeaway number 8, I mean, one of the biggest takeaways looking at these academic studies, looking at the evidence for me, is the New York Times found a quote about off-world vehicles not made on this earth. They found it credible enough to print. And that either speaks highly of the UFO story or some element of it, or maybe it speaks poorly of the New York Times, and I don't want to criticize the Times at all. I loved writing for them. The fact that they found a quote about off-road vehicles credible enough to print is huge. It's huge. Whatever the truth behind it, the fact that that even made it through the vetting process is just enormous. Now, another piece of evidence I think we should talk about before the end of this episode is the so-called Wilson memo. It's a very controversial and disputed piece of evidence, but it's a piece of evidence linked to the New York Times article because the man quoted in the New York Times about off-world vehicles, Dr. Eric Davis, is related to the Wilson memo. The Wilson memo supposedly memorializes a meeting between Dr. Eric Davis and a Admiral Wilson, in which this Admiral Wilson discusses being refused access to a UFO crash retrieval program run by a military contractor, despite the fact that his rank should allow him access and oversight over such a program. Now, this memo claims Admiral Wilson finds out about it. He complains that he's being denied access. He yells, he gets angry about it. Now, when he complains, he's not given access as he usually should be, as his rank would suggest. When he complains, he supposedly is threatened with early retirement and demotion. Now, UFO believers often point to this memo as one of the best pieces of evidence, one of the better pieces of evidence at least. Although it should be noted that the real-life Admiral Wilson claims this meeting never took place. But if the details of the memo are true, and he really was threatened over knowledge of such a program, it makes sense that he would deny the meeting took place. It's one of those catch-22s with the UFO conspiracy theories. If you believe in the conspiracy, this memo floating around on the internet, the fact that people deny it's real, that just shows the extent of the conspiracy. If you don't believe the conspiracy, the fact that so many people on the internet believe this memo, which one of the participants says is false, that just shows the people who believe in it aren't right in the head or are just mistaken. Now, whether the memo is real or not, it's interesting that these players are linked. One person from the memo and the New York Times article, as well as the fact that David Grusch's claimed UFO conspiracy theory, the elements of that conspiracy theory are present in other sources, including this Wilson memo. Now, this speaks either to perhaps a long-running disinformation campaign or a sort of meme that keeps getting repeated, or perhaps, and again, I don't take a position one way or another, or perhaps an actual conspiracy where similar claims keep popping up and getting repeated. So what happens next? What happens in the next few years? I can't predict the future. The study show is all about evidence. We try to look at what we can academically verify, and we try to look at reputable sources. I think there's a great article in the publication The Hill, which I agree with, which is titled, "A Monumental UFO Scandal is Looming." And this article starts with this great quote. It says, quote, "The decades-long saga of unidentified flying objects is barreling towards one of two stunning conclusions. Either the U.S. government has mounted an extraordinary, decades-long cover-up of UFO retrieval and reverse engineering activities, or elements of the defense and intelligence establishment are engaging in a staggeringly brazen psychological disinformation campaign." I do think, personally, it's possible there are other options. It's possible everyone is confused by the events and rumors have filled the gap. It's possible we have amazing, technologically advanced craft we are trying to keep secret any way possible. And it's possible that this is evidence of mental illness or PTSD at high levels in the military. It's a very stressful job, serving in the military and intelligence, and we do need to be respectful of people's potential mental health. We do need to be respectful and consider potential adverse mental health consequences, which could manifest itself in various ways. But the fact that so many military and government-affiliated officials, from Lou Elizondo, Christopher Mellon, Eric Davis, Harry Reid, John Podesta, and now David Grusch, the fact that they all have varying degrees of claims about the reality of these craft, it seems something strange is going on. Grusch claims that he's provided evidence or could provide evidence in classified settings. And so it's definitely possible lawmakers or people with clearances will soon know whether his claims are believable or not. It's also notable that lawmakers have added demands for disclosure in various pieces of legislation. So if there's truth behind these claims, it's possible we'll know more soon, or at least lawmakers will know more soon. One more piece of evidence I think worth talking about is this quote from John Brennan, the former director of the CIA. He said this on the great podcast, Conversations with Tyler, which I love. I recommend everyone listen to. He says, quote, "I think some of the phenomena we're going to be seeing continues to be unexplained and might, in fact, be some type of phenomenon that is the result of something that we don't yet understand, and that could involve some type of activity that some might say constitutes a different form of life." Now, to be honest, that is a vague statement, but the fact that the former head of the CIA is even giving some credence to these claims just is both confusing and suggests that it could be part of this hypothesized disinformation campaign, or it suggests also that there could be some truth behind it, and even the head of the CIA is confused. In the show notes and the show description, I link to several other interesting but extremely out there conspiracies that are popular on the internet. One of them is famous and called the 4chan whistleblower. This is a series of posts on 4chan by someone who basically claims to have worked on this program. Basically, this person starts off these posts saying these few sentences, which I'll repeat. He says, "I have intimate knowledge of what the U.S. currently knows about UFOs minus the last 2 years. UFOs are primarily unmanned drones. UFOs are built to spec each time they're deployed. UFOs are created by a mobile construction facility that hides in the ocean. The construction facility destroys anything that comes close to it and will disappear for days when approached aggressively. The U.S. believes this facility has been active on Earth for at least 100 years or much longer." If you really want to go down the rabbit hole, that's a very interesting post. It's probably all fake, but it's interesting. There's also a different post that was popular on Reddit by someone who claims to have worked on alien bodies. I think this is probably even less likely to be true, but various people with medical degrees who are much more qualified than I am to talk on the topic have various interpretations of the plausibility of this person's claimed work on the alien bodies. I think my final takeaway when considering all these studies, considering the evidence in public, is that we will hopefully know a lot more soon. Grusch's explosive and historic claims to Congress are unprecedented. The reporting in places like the New York Times is also unprecedented, and this is a strange spot we find ourselves in. I think we will hopefully know a lot more in the next several years, and I hope whatever the truth is, that it's good for the world, because the consequences of the most extreme conspiracies being real are earth-shattering. There's no other way to put it. That's especially the case when you think about the physics study we identified earlier about the near speed of light travel, the idea that another civilization could potentially travel between 40 light years in time they experience as a day or two. That is just mind-blowing and difficult to comprehend. Ultimately, whatever happens, I think this time period will be a fertile area for more academic studies and hopefully inspire researchers to do more great work. Thanks for checking out The Study Show. We've been producing content since February 2023. Be sure to follow us on YouTube and YouTube podcasts at The Study Show, on Instagram at The Study Show, on TikTok at The Study Show. We're at thestudyshow.com or thestudysshowpodcast.com, as well as on X or Twitter at TheStudyShowX. Thanks so much. I would also like to thank the many authors, writers, and academics, and other researchers and journalists who contributed great work, which was summarized or reviewed in this episode.